The Crimson Keep was playing host to the traveling squirrel folk on their annual pilgrimage to the Bright Fir. They honored the young king with an invite to their Leaf's Fall Festival, the first outsider to be asked to this mysterious gathering in generations. Reggie was pleased to take some time away from battle to experience the wonder of the great Golden Woods. Reggie was greeted by the squirrel guide Zazu at the forest edge. She'd been sent to show the king the way to the festival, a secret path known only by squirrel folk. The forest was not at all what the young king expected. He'd heard the Bright Fir's golden leaves bathed the entire forest in light. There'd been no mention of these giant mushrooms that made the air heavy with spores. The Bright Fir's golden light fell on the forest clearing and caravans like an enchantment. The mood, though, was not festive, but worried. Zazu, embarrassed, explained the reason they asked the brave young king here was to plead for his help. The Squirrel Elder and a priest of the Bright Fur journeyed to the abandoned Glimmer Mines to harvest bright moss, and had not returned. With the golden light of the camp behind him, Reggie headed back out into the gloom in search of the mines. Signs were not promising. Outside the Glimmer Mines were vicious beetles. What had driven them from their cave home? The squirrel folk were in more danger than they knew. The Squirrel Elder's walking cane, lying abandoned. If he didn't have it, Reggie wondered, how did he carry himself from this place? The rocks of the Glimmer Mines glowed with a blue light unlike anything Reggie had ever seen. Reggie wondered what the moles would make of this place. The Squirrel Elder's lifeless body lay on the floor, the priest at his side. Before Reggie could approach, he found out why they were trapped here. This was the nest of the Beetle Queen. Beetle Queen in her glimmering grave, Reggie approached the still body of the Squirrel Elder. The Squirrel Elder rose with a yelp. He'd been in trance from the ritual smoking of extra potent bright moss. Unaware, he almost became the Beetle Queen's snack. Thanking Reggie for the rescue, they headed back to begin the festival. This market stall sells all sorts of quality goods. A few coins spent here would spruce up the Crimson Keep nicely. With the Squirrel Elder back at the Bright Fir, with a tankard of bright sap in his paw, the festival of Leaves Fall could finally begin. No sooner had the Elder raised his cup into the air to begin his opening speech, came the clattering of wood and smashing of glass. To everyone's horror, a drunken squirrel had knocked over the table with the bright sap. The festival of Leaves Fall could not continue without the rare and sacred drink. The Squirrel Elder turned to Reggie, asking if the brave young king would again save their festival and venture into the shrine of the tapped root to collect more bright sap. In the maze of bright fir roots, the spores were so thick Reggie had to wear his gas mask. Was this infestation the reason the bright firs were dying? The shrine of the tapped root stood before him, but the root looked damaged. Before Reggie could wonder what had done this, he got his answer. A root worm, bloated and enraged by bright sap. Had been banished from these parts for generations. Reggie had a feeling its presence meant something was rotten in the state of bright fir. To Reggie's dismay, the tap was broken. Reggie did not look forward to returning to the Squirrel Elder with no sacred sap and news of rootworms. Though shocked at the news, the Squirrel Elder had an idea. The tap was one of several made in the basement woodsmith workshop of Castle Dray. Perhaps Reggie could look there. Approaching the ruins of Castle Dray, Reggie's whiskers twitched at the familiar stench on the breeze. He refused to believe it, after all he'd done to be rid of them. It could not be. The frog scourge had returned, a pestilence on the sacred forest that could not be allowed to spread. A slapping of webbed feet from the basement. More pond filth waited below, and would soon feel his blade. The frog squatter was none other than General Hakak, no better than a common thief looting supplies. The only thing he'd be taking today was his last breath. The satisfaction of the Frog General dead at his paws, Reggie found the replacement tap. The squirrels would have their sacred sap. Reggie was surprised to find a mole in Brightfur Forest. The mole was embarrassed. He'd got lost going from Station C-19 to Station 24-7. Reggie sympathized. Those tunnels were a tough route. Lost he may have been, but still enterprising. The mole had armor for sale, if the king had the coin. The mole had heard of this king of rats who traveled the underground, but never believed it was true. Perhaps Reggie knew the tunnels well enough to give him directions. The king barely noticed the journey back to the Bright Fur, dwelling as he was on the return of frog spawn to the Ratdom. Where there's a general, an army must be close by. Reggie handed over the tap, but wished he could spare the old squirrel the pain of hearing frogs were in Castle Dray. The squirrel elder could not allow the festival to continue, knowing pond scum squatted in their ancestral home. Reggie did not need to be asked. He knew what needed to be done. Reggie could not believe the frogs had returned after all he had done to be rid of them. Pond scum never learn. As Reggie made his way towards the ruins of Castle Dray, the stench of pond scum once again drifted in on the cool breeze. The familiar scent made him wonder why the frogs had suddenly reappeared in the Ratdom. He'd heard tales of the great Castle Dray from his father's whiskers, but it was hard to believe this mushroom-pocked ruin was ever that once proud place. The evil frog spawn had been looting. These frogs believed they could make the central tower a new base, but Reggie would show just how wrong they were. central tower. Whoever was collecting all these supplies would surely be at the top. The young king had thought his lust for revenge was sated, but he would not be satisfied until every frog in his kingdom had croaked their last. A strange crunch beneath his paws. Reggie looked down to see seeds on the floor. Jars of golden bright fir seeds were all around, enough to plant 100 forests. Reggie wondered if the squirrel elder knew they were here. Seems he wasn't the only one here for vengeance. Shield Maiden Yellowtongue was waiting, screaming the name of her fallen brother, War Chief Greenwort. Fading echoes of her last croak, Castle Dre was returned to peace. There was a shrine in the room, carved figures of Reggie and his enemies in Bright Fir Forest. The frogs had planned it all to lure him here. girls at the Bright Fir rejoiced to hear Castle Dray was back to its somber state of peace once more. The Squirrel Elder could start the Leaf Fall Festival at last. Reggie basked in the joy of the squirrel folk, as warming as the golden light of the firs. He reclined in his chair and was honored with a cup of bright sap. Being king has its perks. The pilgrimage to Bright Fir was not an easy wagon ride. This family's wagon wheel broke in the mud. They offered a reward if Reggie could find them a replacement. With a new wheel in paw, the wagon would be on its way. Reggie assured them they'd not missed the festival as there'd been a few minor delays. A new notice on the quest board. A band of musicians have disappeared after a long night regaling the Crimson Keep with their drinking songs, whether they wanted to be regaled or not. Rex, the band's front rat, would know more. Rex the Bard looked nervous. He'd found the crypt gates open. No amount of fermented bug juice would see him go in, but his bandmates were not always so wise. The young king didn't hesitate. Reggie's head was pained from the drinking and the noise of last night, but he'd still found his bed. What had these young bards found? Several empty bug brew bottles littered the floor, a sure sign of bards. Reggie was getting closer. Amy had taken refuge by an old statue and was getting some much-needed shut-eye. Reggie only meant to wake the bard, but his shout awoke the zombified remains of Mausamoto Musashi. Mausamoto was a legendary swordmaster. Reggie hoped to get one more lesson before putting him to rest. Learned from Mausamoto when he was alive. But now, his dual blades had fallen silent forever. Reggie directed Amy to the Crimson Keep, glad to have found her safe.